"Mom, if something happens, check the phone." Those were the last coherent words my son Michael whispered to me in that sterile hospital room, his hand trembling as he pressed his cell phone into mine. The machines around us beeped frantically, and something inside me shattered completely when I realized he was saying goodbye. Can you imagine hearing your child speak as if they already knew they were leaving this world? What would you do if the person you brought into this world was preparing you for a life without them? I held his hand and promised I would, but I already knew that the next day, opening that phone would forever change everything I thought I knew about my family. But before I continue, take a quick look to make sure you're still subscribed. I don't want you to miss any of these eye-opening stories. My name is Francis Delacroix. I'm 67 years old, and for 42 years, I was a high school literature teacher. I raised Michael as a single mother after his father walked out when he was just 8 years old. I worked double shifts, gave up weekend plans, and turned down romantic opportunities to make sure my boy had everything he needed. I watched him grow into a wonderful man, marry Sarah, and give me 2 beautiful grandchildren, Emma, 7, and little James, 4. And now, sitting in that hospital chair, his final words echoed in my mind like a warning I didn't yet understand. The cancer had taken him so quickly. 6 months from diagnosis to this. The room smelled of disinfectant and wilted flowers, those awful lilies Sarah had brought that morning. She sat across from me, dabbing her eyes with tissues, her red hair falling perfectly, even in grief. The children were at home with my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, too young to see their father like this. Michael's breathing had become labored, each exhale a struggle, but his grip on my hand remained firm until the very end. When the monitors finally flatlined at 3:47 in the morning, Sarah collapsed dramatically into the chair, her sobs echoing through the corridor. But something felt wrong. As I watched Sarah's performance of grief, I noticed she kept checking her own phone, even as her husband's body grew cold. Her tears seemed calculated, timed perfectly with each nurse who entered the room. When the doctor came to discuss arrangements, she immediately mentioned Michael's life insurance policy, asking specific questions about processing times that seemed oddly rehearsed for someone supposedly overwhelmed by loss. The funeral home, the will reading, Sarah's insistence on handling everything herself, her strange reluctance to let me spend time alone with Emma and James, the way she kept asking about Michael's phone, claiming she needed it for closure, her nervous laughter when I mentioned keeping it safe. Each interaction felt like a performance, and I began to sense that my daughter-in-law was hiding something significant from me. 3 days after we buried my son, I finally gathered the courage to turn on his phone. What I discovered in those messages would reveal that Michael's final words weren't just a dying man's rambling, and what I was about to uncover would make that hospital room conversation just the beginning of a nightmare that would destroy everything I believed about the woman I had welcomed into our family. The phone felt heavy in my hands as I sat in Michael's old bedroom, surrounded by the trophies and books that had defined his childhood. 3 days had passed since the funeral, and Sarah had finally taken the children to her mother's house, giving me my first moment alone with the device that held my son's final secret. My fingers trembled as I entered his passcode. Emma's birthday, something he had never changed since she was born. The home screen appeared, showing a photo of Michael with Emma and James at the park last summer, their faces glowing with the kind of innocent joy that now felt like it belonged to another lifetime. I scrolled through his apps, unsure of what I was looking for, when I noticed his text messages had an unusual number of unread notifications. My heart began to race as I opened the messaging app and saw names I didn't recognize mixed with family contacts I knew well. The first conversation that caught my attention was with someone named David Martinez, private investigator. The timestamp showed their last exchange had occurred just 2 days before Michael entered the hospital for what we thought would be his final round of treatment. My breath caught in my throat as I read the investigator's message. "Francis, I have the proof you requested about Sarah's activities. The photos and financial records are compiled in the attached report. I'm sorry this isn't the news any husband wants to hear." Michael had hired a private investigator to follow his own wife. I scrolled up through their conversation, discovering weeks of correspondence that painted a picture I never could have imagined. Michael had grown suspicious after noticing unusual charges on their credit cards, unexplained absences, and Sarah's sudden interest in his life insurance policies. The investigators' reports detailed Sarah's secret meetings with a man named Richard Holbrook, a wealthy real estate developer who was going through his own messy divorce. The photographs showed Sarah entering luxury hotels with this man, sharing intimate dinners, while my son lay dying in a hospital bed just miles away. But the financial records were even more devastating. Sarah had been systematically transferring money from their joint accounts into a private account that Michael couldn't access. She had taken out a second mortgage on their house without his knowledge, forging his signature while he was weakened by chemotherapy. The investigator had traced payments, showing Sarah had been planning to disappear with Richard and the children the moment Michael's life insurance money came through. My hands shook as I continued reading. Michael's messages to the investigator revealed a man who was heartbroken but thinking clearly about his children's future. "I don't want revenge," he had written. "I just need to make sure Emma and James will be safe and loved when I'm gone. My mother, Frances, is the only person I trust completely. She needs to know what Sarah is planning so she can protect them." The investigator had asked if Michael wanted to confront Sarah directly, but my son's response brought tears to my eyes. "I'm dying, David. I don't have the strength for a legal battle that could traumatize my children, but I won't let them grow up with a woman who sees them as obstacles to her new life. Frances will know what to do. She always has." I opened the attached files and saw dozens of photographs that made my stomach turn. Sarah laughing intimately with Richard at expensive restaurants while Michael underwent treatments that left him too weak to eat solid food. Sarah shopping for jewelry and clothes with money meant for the children's education fund. Sarah kissing this man in the parking lot of the very hospital where my son was fighting for his life. But the most chilling discovery was a recording the investigator had made during one of Sarah's phone calls with Richard. Her voice, cold and calculating, discussing how much longer they would have to wait before everything worked itself out. She talked about Michael's condition like a business arrangement, speculating about his life expectancy, with the casual tone someone might use to discuss the weather. "The doctor says it could be weeks, maybe a month if he responds to the new treatment," Sarah's voice said through the phone speaker. "But honestly, Richard, I'm ready to start our real life together. The kids will adjust. They're young enough that they won't remember much about him anyway." Richard's response was equally heartless. "What about his mother? Frances seems very attached to the children." Sarah's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Frances is old and alone. She'll be so grateful for any contact with Emma and James that she won't question anything. Besides, once we move to California, distance will solve that problem naturally." I had to stop the recording. My entire body was shaking with a rage I had never experienced before. This woman, whom I had welcomed into our family, whom I had supported through Michael's illness, whom I had trusted with my precious grandchildren, was not just betraying my dying son. She was planning to steal his children and erase his memory from their lives entirely. But there was more. Hidden in a folder labeled Emergency Information, I found documents that Michael had prepared with his lawyer without Sarah's knowledge. A revised will that left everything to the children in a trust managed by me. A detailed letter explaining his discoveries about Sarah's betrayal and his wishes for the children's custody. Legal papers that would strip Sarah of any claim to his assets and ensure that Emma and James would remain with me if anything happened to her. My son had spent his final weeks not just fighting cancer, but fighting to protect his children from their own mother. As I sat there in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of Sarah's monstrous deception, I realized that Michael's dying words hadn't been a request, they had been a mission. He had entrusted me with the truth that would save Emma and James from a woman who saw them as nothing more than inconvenient reminders of a life she wanted to forget. I looked at the phone again and noticed there were more unopened messages, including several from someone named Attorney Williams, with the subject line, "Urgent, Custody, Documentation." My heart pounded as I realized that my investigation was just beginning, and what I was about to discover about Sarah's plans would be far worse than anything I had found so far. The messages from Attorney Williams opened a door to a level of betrayal that made my previous discoveries seem almost innocent by comparison. As I read through the legal correspondence, I discovered that Michael had been working with this lawyer for months, not just to protect his children's inheritance, but because he had uncovered something far more sinister about Sarah's relationship with Richard Holbrook. Williams had sent Michael a background report on Richard that revealed a pattern of behavior that chilled me to the bone. This wasn't Richard's first affair with a married woman whose husband was terminally ill. In fact, over the past 15 years, Richard had systematically targeted at least 4 other women in similar situations. Women with dying husbands, substantial life insurance policies, and young children. The first case involved Rebecca Martinez, whose husband died of brain cancer in 2008. Rebecca disappeared with her 2 children just weeks after receiving a life insurance payout of $800,000. The children, then aged 5 and 7, were never seen again by their paternal grandparents. Rebecca's credit cards and bank accounts showed activity in various states before going completely silent in Mexico. The second case was Jennifer Walsh, whose husband succumbed to liver disease in 2012. Jennifer vanished with her 3 children and a life insurance settlement of $1.2 million. Her former in-laws hired private investigators, but the trail went cold after Jennifer and the children were spotted boarding a private plane in Texas. The pattern was always the same. Richard would meet these vulnerable women through carefully orchestrated chance encounters, usually at hospitals or support groups for families dealing with terminal illness. He would provide emotional support during their darkest hours, slowly building romantic relationships while their husbands deteriorated. Once the husbands died and the insurance money came through, both Richard and the women would disappear completely, taking the children to new lives where their fathers' families could never find them. But this wasn't just about money or starting fresh. It was something much darker. Attorney Williams had discovered that Richard had connections to an underground network that specialized in creating new identities for people willing to pay substantial fees. These weren't simple name changes or relocations. These were complete identity erasures that made people virtually impossible to trace through legal channels. The most horrifying detail was what happened to the children in these arrangements. According to the investigators' research, most of these children were eventually placed with adoptive families who believed they were rescuing orphans from difficult situations. The biological mothers would receive additional payments for surrendering their children to what they were told were better opportunities, while Richard moved on to find his next vulnerable target. My hands were shaking so violently that I nearly dropped the phone as I read Michael's messages to Attorney Williams. David Martinez confirmed that Sarah has been meeting with Richard at the Riverside Hotel every Tuesday and Thursday while I'm at treatment. But what terrifies me most is that yesterday, I overheard her on the phone talking about transition plans for the kids and mentioning something about the Arizona contacts. I think they're planning to take Emma and James somewhere I can never be found, even in death. Williams had responded with legal advice that broke my heart. Michael, given your condition and the time constraints we're facing, our best option is to prepare ironclad custody documentation that will activate immediately upon your death. I've also contacted Child Protective Services to create a file documenting our concerns, but without concrete evidence of immediate danger to the children, they can't act preventively. As I tried to connect the dots, I got curious. Where are you listening to me from right now? Drop your city in the comments. I like to imagine these stories echoing in so many different places. The next series of messages revealed that Michael had been working with both the private investigator and the attorney to set up a surveillance operation. They had managed to record several conversations between Sarah and Richard that detailed their specific plans for disappearing with Emma and James. The recordings were hidden in a secure cloud account that would automatically send copies to the FBI, local police, and family court if anything happened to Michael. But reading through Sarah's recorded conversations made me physically ill. She talked about my grandchildren like they were possessions to be managed, rather than human beings who had just lost their father. Richard thinks we should wait at least 6 months before making the move, Sarah's voice said in one recording. Let Frances bond with them a little more so she doesn't get suspicious when we gradually reduce her visits. Then we can tell her we're moving for my job, maybe to Phoenix or San Diego. By the time she realizes we're really gone, we'll already have new names and the kids will be enrolled in schools under different identities. Richard's response was even more calculated. The Arizona contact says he can have everything ready within 72 hours of getting the final payment. New social security numbers, birth certificates, school records, Everything the kids will need to start fresh. Sarah Rodriguez and her children from her first marriage, remember? That's your story if anyone asks. They had planned to erase not just Michael's memory from his children's lives, but his very existence. Emma and James would grow up believing their father was some fictional man named Rodriguez, never knowing about the loving father who had fought cancer while simultaneously fighting to protect them from their own mother. The final message in the thread was from Attorney Williams, sent just 12 hours before Michael died. Michael, everything is in place. Francis has been named as emergency guardian with full legal authority if Sarah attempts to relocate the children without court approval. The evidence we've gathered will be automatically released to authorities if you pass away and Sarah tries to leave the state with Emma and James. Your children will be protected. But as I sat there absorbing the full scope of Sarah's betrayal, I realized that having legal documents was only the beginning. Sarah didn't know that I possessed this information, which meant she was probably still planning to execute her disappearance scheme. I needed to act quickly, but I also needed to be smart about protecting Emma and James without traumatizing them further. I looked at the time on Michael's phone and felt my blood run cold. It was Tuesday afternoon, one of Sarah's regular meeting days with Richard. According to the messages, she was supposed to return from her mother's house with the children that evening. But what if she didn't? What if today was the day they decided to implement their escape plan? I realized that having this evidence meant nothing if I couldn't use it to save my grandchildren before they vanished forever into Richard's network of false identities and disappeared children. I tried calling Sarah's cell phone, my heart pounding as it went straight to voicemail. Then I called her mother's house, only to be told by a confused elderly woman that Sarah and the children had left that morning and weren't expected back. She said they were going to visit Michael's grave, her mother explained. But that was 8 hours ago, dear. I assumed they went back to their house, but they weren't at their house. I drove there immediately, using my spare key to enter the empty home that still smelled like the casseroles neighbors had brought after the funeral. What I found inside made my worst fears seem naive in comparison. Sarah hadn't just been planning to disappear. She had been systematically erasing Michael's presence from his children's lives even before he died. Michael's photographs had been removed from the walls and stored in boxes labeled donation. His clothes were gone from the master bedroom closet. His books, his coffee mugs, even the small wooden cross he had carved for Emma when she was a baby. Everything that connected this house to my son had been methodically packed away as if he had never existed. But the most devastating discovery was in Emma's bedroom. I found a journal she had been keeping, her 7-year-old handwriting recording conversations with her mother that made me understand the true depths of Sarah's manipulation. "Mommy says Daddy was very sick and might not remember us in heaven," Emma had written. "She says we might need to move far away so Daddy's sickness doesn't make us sad anymore. Mommy says Grandma Frances is too old to take care of us and might go to heaven soon too." Sarah had been preparing the children psychologically for their disappearance, convincing them that leaving was not only necessary, but an act of love for their father's memory. She had poisoned their innocent minds against me, making them believe that staying close to their father's family would somehow dishonor his death. James's room revealed even more disturbing evidence. Hidden in his toy box, I found a new passport with his photograph, but listing his last name as Rodriguez. The birth date was correct, but the place of birth had been changed to California, and the parents listed were Sarah Rodriguez and Miguel Rodriguez, not Michael Delacroix, but some fictional father who had never existed. My hands trembled as I realized that Sarah had been planning this deception for months, possibly even before Michael's diagnosis. She had been creating an entirely new identity for her family, one that would allow her to claim the children had no connection to anyone in our state. If she successfully disappeared with Emma and James, any legal documents Michael had prepared would be useless because the children would legally no longer exist under their real names. I was searching through Sarah's dresser when I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Through the bedroom window, I saw Sarah's red sedan pulling into the garage, and my heart stopped when I realized this might be my only chance to confront her before she implemented whatever plan she had been developing during her mysterious day away from her mother's house. I quickly put everything back where I had found it and moved to the living room, trying to appear casual as Sarah entered through the kitchen door. She froze when she saw me, her face cycling through surprise, guilt, and then a calculated smile that I now recognized as completely artificial. "Francis, what a lovely surprise," she said, her voice carrying that same false sweetness I had been too grief-stricken to notice before. "I was just bringing the children home from Grandma's. They're sleeping in the car. The poor little ones are exhausted." But I could see through the kitchen window that her car was empty. "Where are Emma and James, Sarah?" I asked directly, abandoning any pretense of politeness. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she composed herself. "Oh, they decided to spend another night with Grandma. She's been so lonely since Grandpa passed, and you know how much she adores them." It was a smooth lie, delivered with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to deception. But I had heard her mother's confused voice on the phone, and I knew Sarah was buying time for something. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me," I said, watching her face carefully. "Michael was very specific about wanting me to check his phone. Have you been trying to access it?" The mask slipped completely. Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw the cold calculation that my son must have recognized in his final weeks. "Francis, Michael was heavily medicated and confused at the end. You can't take seriously everything he said in that condition, so you don't think I should look at his phone?" "I think," Sarah said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "that you should focus on moving forward rather than dwelling on things that will only cause you pain. Michael is gone, and we all need to accept that and think about what's best for the children." The way she said, "what's best for the children," sent a chill down my spine because I could hear the subtext. She was preparing to tell me that what was best for Emma and James was a life far away from their father's memory and their father's mother. "Where are they really, Sarah?" I asked again. She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face as if trying to determine how much I actually knew. Then she made a decision that revealed more about her character than any of the evidence I had found on Michael's phone. "The children are safe, Francis. That's all you need to know right now. But I think it's time we had an honest conversation about their future." She moved to the couch and sat down, gesturing for me to join her in a way that felt more like a business meeting than a family discussion. Michael and I had many conversations about what would happen if his treatment didn't work. He wanted the children to have stability and consistency, not to be bounced between different family members who might not be able to provide the structure they need. It was such a carefully crafted lie that I almost admired her skill. She was rewriting Michael's final wishes to justify whatever she had planned, counting on my grief and confusion to make me accept her version of events. "He specifically asked me to make sure they weren't burdened with too much sadness," Sarah continued. "He worried that staying here, surrounded by reminders of his illness and death, would traumatize them. He wanted them to have a fresh start somewhere they could heal and be happy children again." Every word was a betrayal of my son's actual wishes, a manipulation designed to make me complicit in my own separation from his children. But she had made a crucial mistake. She didn't know that I had already read Michael's real thoughts about her and their future. "That's interesting," I said carefully, "because Michael told me something very different. He said that if anything happened to him, I should make sure Emma and James stayed connected to their father's family and their father's memory." Sarah's composure cracked slightly. "Francis, you're grieving and confused. Michael never said anything like that to me." "Are you absolutely certain about that, Sarah?" Something in my tone must have warned her that this conversation wasn't going the way she had planned. She stood up abruptly, moving toward the kitchen in a way that seemed designed to put distance between us. "I think this conversation should wait until we're both less emotional," she said. "Why don't you go home and get some rest? I'll bring the children by tomorrow so you can spend some time with them." But I knew with absolute certainty that if I left that house, I would never see Emma and James again. Sarah's entire demeanor had changed from false friendliness to barely concealed hostility, and I could see her calculating her next moves even as she spoke. "I'm not leaving without knowing where my grandchildren are," I said firmly. Sarah turned back to face me, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw her without any pretense. The woman looking at me was cold, calculating, and completely without conscience. "Francis," she said quietly, "you need to understand something. Those children are mine, not yours. Michael is dead, and his family's claim to them died with him. I've been patient with your grief, but my patience has limits. The casual cruelty of those words, reducing my son's death to a legal technicality and my love for his children to an inconvenience, made something fundamental shift inside me. This woman had not only betrayed my dying son, but was now trying to steal his children while standing in the home he had worked so hard to provide for them. But what happened next would force me to make a choice that would define the rest of my life, because at that moment, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message, and I caught a glimpse of the sender's name. Richard, flight confirmation for tonight. Are you ready? The text message confirmed my worst fears. Sarah was planning to disappear with the children that very night. I watched her face as she read Richard's message, and I saw the exact moment she realized that her timeline had been compromised. She looked up at me with a mixture of panic and cold determination that made my blood run cold. "Francis, I think you should leave now," she said, her voice taking on a threatening edge I had never heard before. "This conversation is over." But I couldn't leave. Not when I knew that Emma and James were somewhere with people who planned to erase their father's memory and steal them from everyone who truly loved them. "I'm not going anywhere without my grandchildren, Sarah. Where are they?" She moved toward the kitchen counter, and I noticed her hand hovering near a block of knives. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable. She was prepared to escalate this confrontation if necessary. "You're becoming hysterical, Francis. I think the grief has affected your judgment more than you realize." That's when I made a decision that surprised us both. I pulled Michael's phone from my purse and held it up so she could see the screen. "I know about Richard, Sarah. I know about the private investigator, the financial records, and the other families you've done this to. I know about the false passports and the plan to disappear tonight." The color drained from her face. For several seconds, we stared at each other across the kitchen, both understanding that everything had changed. Then Sarah's expression hardened into something that barely looked human. "You stupid old woman," she said quietly. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." She reached for her own phone, presumably to warn Richard, but I was faster than either of us expected. My 42 years of breaking up fights between teenagers had given me reflexes that Sarah hadn't counted on. I grabbed her phone before she could dial and held both devices out of her reach. "Tell me where Emma and James are, and maybe we can work something out," I said, though I had no intention of negotiating with someone who had spent months planning to steal my son's children. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You think you've won something? Francis, you have no idea how deep this goes. Richard has connections you can't imagine. People who make problems disappear permanently. If you interfere with our plans, you won't just lose the children. You'll lose everything." But as she spoke, I heard a car pulling into the driveway. Through the kitchen window, I saw a white sedan with tinted windows parking behind Sarah's car, effectively blocking her vehicle in the garage. Two men in dark suits got out and began walking toward the house with the confident stride of people who were used to handling problems. Sarah saw them too, and her entire demeanor changed from threatening to terrified. "Oh no," she whispered. "They weren't supposed to come here. Richard said they would wait until after..." "After what, Sarah?" She was backing toward the rear door now, her face pale with a fear that seemed to go far beyond concern about custody battles or legal documents. "Francis, listen to me very carefully. Those men are not here to help anyone. Richard's associates don't leave witnesses when they clean up situations like this." The front doorbell rang, followed immediately by heavy knocking. A man's voice called out, "Mrs. Delacroix, we need to speak with you about your grandchildren. Please open the door." The fact that they knew my name and had come directly to this house meant that Richard's network had been monitoring the situation more closely than I had realized. But something in Sarah's terrified expression made me understand that she wasn't just afraid of being caught. She was afraid of these men themselves. "Sarah, where are Emma and James?" I demanded again. But this time my voice carried desperation rather than authority. "They're safe for now," she whispered, moving toward the back door. "But if those men think you're going to cause problems for their operation, they'll make sure the children disappear permanently. Not just new identities, gone completely." The knocking became more insistent, and I heard one of the men telling the other to check the back of the house. We were trapped, and I realized that my confrontation with Sarah had inadvertently triggered something much more dangerous than a custody dispute. "There's a phone in Michael's nightstand," Sarah said quickly. "Hidden compartment behind the drawer. It has numbers for FBI contacts who were working with his lawyer. Call them and tell them Code Phoenix. They'll know what that means." Before I could ask what Code Phoenix meant, Sarah had slipped out the back door and disappeared into the neighborhood behind the house. I was alone with two dangerous men approaching from the front, and the terrifying realization that my grandchildren were in the hands of people who treated human lives like business transactions. I ran to Michael's bedroom and found the hidden phone exactly where Sarah had described. But as I scrolled through the contacts looking for FBI numbers, I heard the front door being forced open. Heavy footsteps moved through the house systematically, and I knew I had perhaps minutes before they found me. The first FBI contact went straight to voicemail. The second one rang twice before a woman's voice answered. "Agent Martinez, Federal Bureau of Investigation." "This is Francis Delacroix," I whispered. "My son Michael left instructions to call you with Code Phoenix. There are men in my house, and my grandchildren are missing. Mrs. Delacroix, stay on the line and find a secure location. We've been monitoring Richard Holbrook's network for months. Units are already en route to your location." But the footsteps were getting closer, and I could hear the men communicating with each other in hushed tones that suggested they were conducting a professional search rather than a random break-in. "Mrs. Delacroix," Agent Martinez continued, "your son provided us with extensive documentation about a child trafficking network. We believe your grandchildren are being held at a location outside the city while arrangements are made for their permanent disappearance. We need you to stay safe until our agents arrive." Child trafficking. The words hit me like a physical blow as I realized that this wasn't just about Sarah wanting a new life with Richard. My grandchildren had become commodities in a network that specialized in making children disappear forever. I heard one of the men say, "Check the bedrooms," and I knew I was out of time. But as I looked around Michael's room for a hiding place, I noticed something I had missed earlier. A manila envelope taped under his desk with my name written on it in his handwriting. Inside the envelope was a key, an address written on hospital letterhead, and a note that read, "Mom, if you're reading this, Sarah has already made her move. The children are probably at the Riverside Storage Facility, Unit 217. Agent Martinez knows about this location. Stay safe and remember, you're stronger than you know. Take care of our babies. Love always, Michael." My son had anticipated this exact scenario and had prepared one final gift for his children, a roadmap to their rescue. But as I heard the men moving down the hallway toward Michael's room, I realized that getting this information to the FBI might require surviving the next few minutes. The doorknob turned, and I found myself face to face with a man whose cold eyes told me that my life meant nothing to him beyond whatever inconvenience it might cause to his operation. The man standing in Michael's doorway was younger than I expected, maybe 40 years old, with the kind of forgettable face that would blend into any crowd. But his eyes held a coldness that made me understand why Sarah had been so terrified when she saw their car arrive. "Mrs. Delacroix," he said politely, as if we were meeting at a church social rather than in my dead son's bedroom, while I clutched evidence of a child trafficking operation. "My name is Detective Morrison. We're investigating some irregularities regarding your son's death, and we need to ask you a few questions." He was lying, of course. Real detectives don't break into houses or travel in pairs wearing identical dark suits. But his calm demeanor was somehow more frightening than if he had been obviously threatening. "I'd be happy to answer questions," I said, trying to keep my voice steady while sliding Michael's note into my pocket. "But I'll need to see some identification first." He smiled, and something about that expression made my skin crawl. "Of course. But first, I'm curious about what you were doing at this house today. According to our information, you don't live here." The way he phrased the question told me that Richard's network had been watching me, probably since Michael's death. They knew my routines, my address, possibly even my phone records. This wasn't a random intervention. It was a carefully planned operation to eliminate a threat to their business. "I was looking for my grandchildren," I said honestly, because at this point, deception seemed more dangerous than the truth. "Ah, yes, Emma and James," he said, pulling out a small notebook as if he were actually conducting a police interview. When did you last see them? 3 days ago, at their father's funeral. And you haven't heard from their mother since then? I hesitated, unsure how much they already knew about my confrontation with Sarah. She said they were staying with her mother, but when I called to check on them, her mother said they had left that morning. The man nodded as if this information confirmed something he already suspected. Mrs. Delacroix, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve honesty during this difficult time. Your daughter-in-law has become involved with some very dangerous people. We believe she may have taken the children somewhere unsafe. The way he twisted the truth was masterful, using my genuine concern for Emma and James to make me view him as an ally rather than a threat. If I hadn't already known about Richard's network, I might have believed he was actually trying to help. What kind of dangerous people? I asked, playing along while trying to figure out how to get Michael's phone to the real FBI contacts. Human traffickers, Mrs. Delacroix. People who prey on vulnerable families and exploit children for profit. The irony of him describing his own operation was so brazen that I almost laughed despite my terror. We have reason to believe your grandchildren are being prepared for illegal adoption through a network that operates across several states. But then he said something that made my blood freeze. The good news is that we've located them. They're safe for now, but we need your cooperation to ensure they stay that way. You know where Emma and James are? We do. But the situation is delicate, Mrs. Delacroix. These traffickers are extremely dangerous when they feel cornered. If we approach them incorrectly, they'll disappear with the children, and we may never find them again. I realized with growing horror that he was describing exactly what would happen if the FBI raided the storage facility without careful coordination. He was using the truth about trafficking networks to manipulate me into cooperating with the very people who were trafficking my grandchildren. What do you need from me? I asked, genuinely curious about how far he would take this charade. We need you to make contact with Sarah and convince her to bring the children to a secure location where we can protect them. She trusts you, and she's more likely to cooperate if the request comes from family. But I don't know how to reach her. She's not answering her phone. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a cell phone. She'll answer this number. Tell her that you've reconsidered your position about the children's future and that you want to discuss a compromise. Ask her to meet you at the Riverside storage facility. She'll know the location. The storage facility. He was asking me to lure Sarah and the children directly into their hands, using my love for Emma and James as bait. But something in his confidence told me that this plan had layers I didn't yet understand. Why the storage facility? I asked. It's neutral territory, he said smoothly. A place where Sarah will feel safe enough to bring the children, but secure enough for us to provide protection. But I was beginning to realize that nothing about this situation was what it appeared to be. If this man really knew where the children were, why did he need Sarah to bring them anywhere? And why was he so certain that Sarah would know about the storage facility? That's when the pieces began clicking into place in a way that made me question everything I thought I understood about the past few hours. Sarah's terror when she saw these men wasn't just fear of being caught. It was the fear of someone who had been betrayed by her own partners. How long have you known about Richard Holbrook's network? I asked, watching his face carefully. His expression didn't change, but I caught a slight pause before he answered. We've been investigating Mr. Holbrook for several months, Mrs. Delacroix. Your son actually provided us with valuable information before his death. That was when I understood the true scope of what Michael had discovered. This man knew details about my son's investigation that could only have come from someone who had been monitoring Michael's communications with the private investigator and the attorney. Richard's network hadn't just been planning to steal Emma and James. They had been watching Michael's efforts to stop them and adapting their strategy accordingly. Did Michael know you were watching him? I asked. For the first time, the man's composure cracked slightly. Mrs. Delacroix, I think you may be confused about the timeline of events. Your son came to us for help, not the other way around. But I had read Michael's messages to Agent Martinez, and I knew that the FBI contacts had been provided by his attorney, not discovered through some independent investigation. This man was lying about fundamental details that could only mean one thing. Richard's network had infiltrated law enforcement or was impersonating federal agents. Show me your badge again, I said firmly. Instead of reaching for identification, he glanced toward the doorway where his partner had appeared. The second man was older, heavier, and had the kind of patient expression that suggested he was accustomed to handling situations that required more direct persuasion. "Mrs. Delacroix," the first man said quietly, "I think you're allowing grief and stress to cloud your judgment. We're trying to help you reunite with your grandchildren, but we need your cooperation to make that happen safely." But at that moment, I heard something that changed everything. The distant sound of sirens approaching from multiple directions. The two men heard it too, and their careful masks of professionalism disappeared completely. "Time to go," the older man said tersely. The younger man turned back to me with an expression that was no longer even pretending to be friendly. "Mrs. Delacroix, you've made a very poor decision today. Your grandchildren's safety was never guaranteed, but now it's become much more complicated." As they moved toward the window, presumably planning to escape through the backyard, the first man delivered a parting message that made my knees weak. Even if the real FBI finds the storage facility, they won't find the children there. Emma and James are already gone, and the only person who knew their final destination was Sarah. Unfortunately, Sarah won't be available to share that information with anyone. They disappeared through the window, just as I heard car doors slamming in the front driveway. But their final words echoed in my mind with terrifying implications. Not only were my grandchildren still missing, but Sarah, the only person who might know where they really were, had been eliminated by her own partners in this monstrous scheme. The real FBI agents who entered Michael's house found me sitting on his bed, clutching his phone, and trying to process the devastating realization that my grandchildren had vanished into a network designed to make people disappear permanently. Agent Martinez was exactly as I had imagined from her voice, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes that had seen too much human cruelty. "Mrs. Delacroix, are you injured?" she asked, while other agents swept through the house checking for the men who had just escaped. "They said Sarah is gone," I whispered. "They said she was the only one who knew where Emma and James really are." Agent Martinez sat beside me on Michael's bed, her expression grave. "Mrs. Delacroix, I need you to tell me everything that happened here today, starting from when you first entered this house." I told her about finding the evidence on Michael's phone, discovering the fake passports in James's room, confronting Sarah, and the terrifying conversation with the men who had claimed to be law enforcement. Agent Martinez listened without interrupting, taking notes and occasionally asking for clarification about timing or specific details. "The storage facility your son mentioned, we raided it an hour ago," she said when I finished. Unit 217 was empty, except for boxes of forged documents and what appeared to be temporary holding supplies. But Mrs. Delacroix, we found evidence that children had been kept there recently. My heart stopped. Evidence? Toys, children's clothing, and a small notebook with Emma's name written inside the cover. But the facility manager said the unit was vacated yesterday evening, which means your grandchildren were moved before Sarah even returned to this house today. The timeline made my head spin. If Emma and James had been moved before my confrontation with Sarah, then her terror when she saw Richard's associates wasn't about being caught in the act. It was about being betrayed by people she thought she could trust. "Agent Martinez, those men said Sarah wouldn't be available to share information about where the children are. What do you think that means?" Her expression told me everything I needed to know before she spoke. "Mrs. Delacroix, we found Sarah's car abandoned at the Riverside Hotel parking lot. There were signs of a struggle, and her purse was left behind with her identification still inside. The room seemed to tilt as I absorbed this information. Sarah, for all her betrayals and manipulations, had been the mother of my grandchildren. Whatever she had done, she didn't deserve to be disappeared by the same network she had trusted with her children's lives. So Emma and James, I couldn't finish the sentence, are in the hands of a trafficking operation that has successfully moved children across international borders for over 15 years, Agent Martinez said gently. But Mrs. Delacroix, your son's documentation has given us more information about this network than we've ever had before. We have a real chance of finding them. But sitting in Michael's childhood bedroom, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had been systematically erased by someone he had trusted completely, I realized that hope wasn't enough. The FBI had procedures and protocols, but Emma and James didn't have time for lengthy investigations. "What happens now?" I asked. "We continue investigating. We follow every lead, check every contact your son documented, and coordinate with international agencies to track movement patterns. But Mrs. Delacroix, I have to be honest with you. Children who disappear into this type of network are extremely difficult to recover once they leave the country. That's when something fundamental shifted inside me. For 67 years, I had been a teacher, a mother, a grandmother, someone who followed rules and trusted systems to protect the people I loved. But the system had failed Michael when he was dying, and it was failing Emma and James now. Agent Martinez, can I ask you something? Of course. If those were your grandchildren, would you sit back and wait for official channels to maybe find them before they disappear forever? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her weighing her professional obligations against her human understanding of my situation. Mrs. Delacroix, I would want to do everything possible to find them, but I would also understand that acting outside legal channels could make the situation worse. In that moment, alone, I knew there was no turning back, but I found myself thinking, if you were in my shoes, would you have the courage to face it, or would you stay silent to survive? Write in the comments, I really want to know. What if I told you that I might have information about this network that isn't in Michael's phone? I said quietly. Agent Martinez leaned forward. What kind of information? The men who were here today, they knew details about the storage facility and about Sarah's movements that they could only have known if they were monitoring the situation in real time. That means they have surveillance capabilities that go beyond what a typical trafficking operation would need. You think they have law enforcement connections? I think they are law enforcement connections, I said. Or at least, they have people inside agencies who are feeding them information about investigations. Agent Martinez's expression darkened. Mrs. Delacroix, are you suggesting that there might be compromised agents involved in this case? I'm suggesting that when that man asked me to lure Sarah to the storage facility, he already knew she wouldn't be there. He was using me to confirm that the FBI was closing in, so his people could accelerate their timeline for moving the children. The implications of what I was saying hung in the air between us. If Richard's network had inside information about FBI operations, then following official procedures might actually be helping the traffickers stay ahead of law enforcement. There's something else, I continued. The man mentioned that Sarah knew the children's final destination, but now that she's gone, that information is lost. But what if it's not lost? What if Sarah left some kind of record that only someone who knew her well would think to look for? Agent Martinez was listening intently now. What are you thinking? Sarah was methodical about everything. She planned this deception for months, created false documents, coordinated with multiple people. Someone that organized doesn't just memorize crucial information. She writes it down somewhere safe. We searched her house thoroughly. If there were records hidden there, we would have found them. But I was thinking about something Sarah had said during our confrontation, something that hadn't made sense at the time, but now seemed significant. She had mentioned transition plans for the kids and Arizona contacts in a way that suggested she had specific information about the next phase of their disappearance. Agent Martinez, did you search Sarah's mother's house? Her mother told us that Sarah and the children left early that morning and she didn't know where they were going. But what if Sarah left something there for safekeeping? Something she could retrieve later if her plans went wrong? Agent Martinez stood up, already reaching for her phone. Mrs. Delacroix, you may have just given us the break we need. I'm going to coordinate a search of the mother's property immediately. But as she started to leave the room, I made a decision that surprised both of us. I'm coming with you. Mrs. Delacroix, that's not possible. This is an active investigation. Agent Martinez, I taught high school for 42 years. I know how teenage girls hide things from their parents. And Sarah was still somebody's daughter. If she left information at her mother's house, I'll recognize hiding places that your agents might miss. She hesitated, and I could see her weighing the risks against the potential benefits of having someone who understood Sarah's psychology helping with the search. Besides, I added, if there are compromised agents feeding information to this network, wouldn't it be safer to have someone involved who you know isn't connected to law enforcement? Agent Martinez looked at me for a long moment, then made a decision that would change everything. Mrs. Delacroix, what I'm about to suggest goes against every protocol I've been trained to follow. But you're right. We need to consider the possibility that this investigation has been compromised from the inside. She pulled out a different phone, one I hadn't seen her use before, and dialed a number. This is Martinez. I need a completely off-the-books team to search a secondary location. No communication through normal channels, and I need people I trust completely. As I listened to her arrange what was essentially a rogue FBI operation to save my grandchildren, I realized that my decision to trust her had just turned us both into people operating outside the system we had always believed would protect us. But Emma and James were running out of time, and sometimes being a good grandmother means being willing to become someone you never thought you could be. Sarah's mother lived in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by the kind of overgrown garden that suggested she spent more time tending to memories than to plants. Agent Martinez had assembled a team of 3 agents she trusted completely, people who had worked with her for years and had no connection to the task forces that might have been compromised by Richard's network. But when we arrived at the house, we found more than we had bargained for. Sarah's mother, Helen, was sitting in her kitchen with a man I recognized from the photographs on Michael's phone, Richard Holbrook himself. They weren't speaking when we entered. They were simply sitting across from each other like 2 people who had been waiting for something inevitable to happen. "Mrs. Patterson," Agent Martinez said, showing her credentials, "we need to search your property for evidence related to your daughter's disappearance." Helen looked up at us with eyes that held a sadness so profound it seemed to have aged her decades beyond her years. "I've been expecting you," she said quietly. "Sarah told me this day would come." Richard stood up slowly, his hands visible and his expression resigned rather than defiant. "Agent Martinez, I assume you're here because you've connected me to Sarah's situation. Mr. Holbrook, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit kidnapping and human trafficking," Agent Martinez said, signaling to her team to take him into custody. But Richard laughed, and the sound was bitter rather than amused. "Agent Martinez, I think you should sit down. The situation is more complicated than you realize." Something in his tone made Agent Martinez pause. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Sarah Delacroix contacted me 6 months ago with a proposition that had nothing to do with romance or starting a new life together. She wanted to sell her children to the highest bidder and disappear with the money." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true. Sarah loved Emma and James." Richard turned to look at me with an expression that might have been pity. "Mrs. Delacroix, your daughter-in-law approached my organization with detailed information about her husband's terminal diagnosis, his life insurance policy, and a plan to fake her own victimization in what she called a perfect crime." Agent Martinez had her hand on her weapon, but she was listening intently. "Explain." "Sarah's plan was brilliant in its simplicity," Richard continued. "She would create evidence of being manipulated by a mysterious trafficker, me, while secretly coordinating the sale of her children to adoptive families willing to pay premium prices for healthy American children with no family connections to complicate future custody issues." Helen spoke for the first time since we had arrived. "She showed me the contracts, Agent Martinez. Legal documents that would make Emma and James appear to be orphans whose mother had passed away in an accident. The adoptive families believed they were rescuing children who had no one else in the world. My legs gave out, and I had to sit down in one of Helen's kitchen chairs as the full scope of Sarah's betrayal became clear. She hadn't been seduced by Richard's network. She had been the architect of her own children's disappearance. The private investigator, the lawyer's documents, Michael's suspicions. Sarah orchestrated all of it? Agent Martinez asked. "Not exactly," Richard said. Michael's investigation was real, and it was complicating Sarah's timeline significantly. She had planned to implement her disappearance immediately after his death, but his documentation forced her to accelerate the process and improvise solutions she hadn't fully prepared. "That's why you eliminated her," I said, understanding finally dawning. "She became a liability to your operation." Richard's expression darkened. "Mrs. Delacroix, we didn't eliminate Sarah. She eliminated herself." Helen reached across the table and pulled out a manila envelope that had been sitting beside her coffee cup. "Francis, Sarah left this for you specifically. She said that if anything went wrong with her plan, she wanted you to understand why she did what she did." Inside the envelope was a letter in Sarah's handwriting, along with copies of medical records I had never seen before. As I read through the documents, I felt the last pieces of my understanding of Sarah's character crumble completely. The medical records showed that Emma had been diagnosed with a rare genetic condition that would require lifelong care and treatment, costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. James showed early signs of the same condition. The letters from specialists painted a picture of two children who would need constant medical supervision and would likely never live independent lives. Sarah's letter explained her reasoning with a cold logic that made my skin crawl. "Francis, I know you'll judge me for this decision, but I refuse to spend the rest of my life caring for two disabled children who will never be able to care for themselves." Michael was too sentimental to face the reality of what Emma and James's futures would look like, but I'm not. The families who are adopting them have the resources to provide the medical care they need, and I'll have the freedom to build a life that isn't defined by doctor's appointments and medical bills. But the most devastating part of the letter was the final paragraph. "I've made sure that you'll never be able to find them, Francis. The adoption records are sealed, the families have moved to different countries, and even I don't know their final destinations. This was always meant to be permanent. Emma and James will have better lives with people who can afford to give them what they need, and I'll finally be free to live for myself." Agent Martinez was reading over my shoulder, and I could feel her tension as she absorbed the implications of Sarah's confession. "Mrs. Delacroix, do you understand what this means? It means that Sarah sold my grandchildren to strangers and destroyed any possibility of finding them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It means more than that," Richard said grimly. "It means that the children are probably already out of the country with their new families, believing that their birth parents died in some tragic accident. Even if we could locate them, reversing international adoptions based on fraud is nearly impossible when the adoptive families acted in good faith." But Helen was shaking her head. "Richard, you're wrong about one thing. Sarah was too smart to leave herself completely without options." She stood up and walked to an old china cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. From behind a stack of plates, she pulled out a small metal box that had been hidden from view. "Sarah gave me this box 3 days ago," Helen said. "She told me it contained insurance in case her new life didn't work out the way she planned. She said that if anything happened to her, I should give it to someone who truly loved the children." Inside the box were copies of documents that Richard's network had never seen. Detailed records of the adoptive families, including their real names, addresses, and the false stories they had been told about Emma and James's background. Sarah had kept copies of everything as leverage against Richard's organization, insurance that would allow her to reclaim the children if her new life proved unsatisfactory. Agent Martinez was already on her phone, coordinating with international agencies, when Richard delivered one final revelation that changed everything we thought we knew about the situation. "Agent Martinez, there's something else you need to know," he said quietly. "Sarah didn't just sell Emma and James. She sold them to families who specialize in adopting children with genetic conditions, families who were specifically looking for children with their particular medical needs." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Emma and James weren't chosen randomly by wealthy families looking for healthy American children. They were specifically selected by people who have experience caring for children with their condition and who have the medical resources to help them thrive." The irony was devastating and profound. Sarah had sold her children to escape the burden of their medical needs, but in doing so, she had accidentally placed them with families who were better equipped to care for them than she had ever been. But as Agent Martinez coordinated the international search and Richard provided detailed information about the adoption network, I realized that knowing where Emma and James were was only the beginning of an even more complex challenge: convincing foreign governments to return children to a family situation that the adoptive parents believed no longer existed. The international coordination that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. Within 48 hours of discovering Sarah's hidden documents, Agent Martinez had assembled a team that included Interpol agents, embassy officials, and child welfare specialists from 3 different countries. The scope of the operation required delicate diplomacy because we weren't just trying to recover stolen children. We were trying to reverse legal adoptions that had been completed by families who believed they were rescuing orphans. Emma had been placed with a family in Switzerland, Dr. Andreas Müller and his wife Ingrid, both pediatric specialists who had lost their own daughter to the same genetic condition that Emma carried. They had specifically sought to adopt a child with Emma's diagnosis because they understood the medical complexities and had the resources to provide optimal care. James was with a family in New Zealand, Professor David and Maria Santos, researchers who had dedicated their careers to developing treatments for the genetic condition. They had adopted James believing that his parents had died in a car accident and that no other family members existed to care for him. Both families had paid substantial fees to adoption agencies, believing they were covering legitimate expenses for international adoptions of children who desperately needed homes. They had no idea they were participating in a trafficking operation or that the children had loving family members searching for them. The legal challenge was immense. Swiss and New Zealand authorities had to be convinced that the adoptions were based on fraudulent information, while simultaneously protecting the rights of adoptive families who had acted in good faith. Meanwhile, Emma and James were living with people who genuinely loved them and were providing excellent medical care. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. When Dr. Muller learned that Emma's biological family was searching for her, he made a decision that stunned everyone involved in the case. Instead of fighting to keep Emma, he contacted the Swiss authorities and requested a meeting with me. Mrs. Delacroix, Dr. Muller said through a video conference call arranged by the Swiss embassy, Ingrid and I have spent 2 months learning to love Emma as our own daughter. But we became parents because we wanted to help a child who needed us, not because we wanted to keep a child from people who loved her first. Emma appeared on the screen beside him, and my heart nearly stopped. She looked healthy and happy, but there was a wariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before Michael's death. When she saw me on the screen, her face lit up with recognition. "Grandma Frances," she said, pressing close to the camera. "Are you coming to get me and James? The nice people here are taking good care of me, but I miss you and I want to come home." Dr. Muller's eyes filled with tears as he watched Emma's reaction. "Mrs. Delacroix, Emma talks about you and her father every day. She remembers everything, his stories, your cooking, the games you played together. This little girl has not forgotten her family, and she should not have to." The conversation with Professor Santos in New Zealand was equally emotional. James, at 4 years old, had adapted more quickly to his new environment. But when he saw me on the video call, he immediately asked, "Grandma, where's Daddy? The people here said Daddy went to heaven, but I want him to come back." Both adoptive families made the extraordinary decision to support the children's return to their biological family, despite the emotional cost to themselves. Dr. Muller and Professor Santos both emphasized that they wanted to maintain relationships with Emma and James, to continue providing medical support, and to ensure that the children understood they had been loved by multiple families. The legal proceedings moved with unprecedented speed because all parties involved prioritized the children's welfare over territorial disputes or bureaucratic procedures. Swiss and New Zealand courts ruled that the adoptions had been obtained through fraud and that the children should be returned to their biological family while maintaining provisions for ongoing medical care coordination with their adoptive families. But the day I flew to Switzerland to bring Emma home, I discovered that the experience had changed her in ways I hadn't anticipated. She was more serious than the 7-year-old I remembered, and she asked questions that broke my heart. "Grandma Frances, why did Mommy give me away?" she asked as we sat in the airport waiting for our flight. "Dr. Muller said my mommy died, but Agent Martinez said that wasn't true. Was I bad? Is that why Mommy didn't want me anymore?" How do you explain to a 7-year-old that her mother sold her because she didn't want to deal with medical challenges? How do you help a child understand betrayal that even adults struggle to comprehend? "Emma, sweetheart, you were never bad, and this was never about anything you did wrong," I said, holding her close. "Sometimes adults make very poor decisions that hurt the people they're supposed to protect. But you need to know that your daddy loved you completely, and I love you completely, and that will never change." The reunion with James in New Zealand was even more complex because he had formed strong attachments to his adoptive family and was confused about why he needed to leave people who had been kind to him. Professor Santos helped by explaining to James that he was going to live with his grandmother, but that they would stay in contact and continue to help with his medical care. "James, "You're going home to your real family," Professor Santos told him gently. "But Grandma Frances and I are going to work together to make sure you stay healthy and strong, okay?" The flight back to the United States was the longest 12 hours of my life. Emma slept fitfully against my shoulder, while James alternated between excitement about seeing his old toys and anxiety about leaving the only stability he had known since his father's death. I found myself wondering if I was equipped to provide the specialized medical care these children would need, and whether removing them from families who understood their conditions was truly in their best interests. But when we landed, and Emma saw Michael's house again, something shifted in her expression. She ran through the rooms touching familiar objects, her father's books, the pictures I had restored to their places on the walls, the wooden cross Michael had carved for her that I had rescued from Sarah's donation boxes. "Grandma Frances," she said, holding the wooden cross. "It feels like Daddy is here again." James was more reserved, but I caught him whispering to one of his old toys, telling it about the nice people in the faraway place who had taken care of him. The resilience of children amazed me, but I also understood that both Emma and James would need professional help to process the trauma of abandonment and displacement. The medical challenges proved manageable with the ongoing support of Dr. Muller and Professor Santos, who both insisted on staying involved in the children's care. Modern technology allowed for regular consultations, and both doctors helped coordinate with local specialists to ensure Emma and James received optimal treatment. 6 months after bringing them home, Emma asked me a question that made me realize how much she had grown from this experience. "Grandma Frances, do you think Mommy ever loved us, or was she just pretending the whole time?" I thought carefully before answering, because children deserve honesty even when the truth is painful. "Emma, I think your mommy loved the idea of being a mother, but she wasn't strong enough to handle the hard parts of actually being one. That's not your fault or James's fault. That was her limitation, not yours." But the question that haunted me most came from James, who had started calling me Grandma Mommy because he couldn't quite remember what our relationship had been before. If my real mommy didn't want me, and my new mommy had to give me back, does that mean nobody really wants me? "James," I said, kneeling down to look directly into his eyes, "I want you more than anything in the world. I fought across countries and through courts and against bad people to bring you home because you belong with me. And that's never going to change." The legal aftermath continued for months as Richard's entire network was dismantled and other trafficked children were located and returned to their families. Sarah's body was never found, but evidence suggested she had been killed by associates who viewed her detailed record-keeping as a threat to their operation. But standing in my kitchen one evening, watching Emma help James with a puzzle while they both chattered about their day at school, I realized that Michael's final gift to his children hadn't just been the evidence that led to their rescue. It had been his absolute faith that love could overcome even the most devastating betrayals. The children would always carry scars from their experience, and I would always carry the responsibility of helping them heal. But we had survived Sarah's ultimate betrayal and found our way back to each other, proving that some bonds are stronger than deception, abandonment, or even death itself. 2 years have passed since I brought Emma and James home, and our house has settled into routines that Michael would recognize, but that carry the weight of everything we've survived together. Emma is 9 now, and her questions about her mother have evolved from childish confusion to a more sophisticated understanding of betrayal and forgiveness. James, at 6, still sometimes asks when his other family might visit, but he no longer seems anxious about being sent away again. The medical challenges that Sarah had used to justify her betrayal proved to be manageable with proper care and the ongoing support of Dr. Muller and Professor Santos. Emma's condition requires regular monitoring and medication, but she participates in dance classes and reads voraciously, just like her father did at her age. James needs more intensive intervention, but his cognitive development has exceeded every early prediction, and he has a remarkable gift for remembering details that amazes his teachers. Our extended family now includes people we never would have met under normal circumstances. Dr. Muller and Ingrid visit twice a year, and Emma has maintained a pen-pal relationship with them that helps her process her experiences while appreciating the care she received during those frightening months. Professor Santos coordinates James's treatment plan with our local specialists and sends packages filled with educational materials designed specifically for children with his condition. The legal proceedings finally concluded 6 months ago, with Richard's conviction on federal trafficking charges and sentences for 17 other members of his network. Agent Martinez estimates that their investigation led to the recovery of 43 children who had been illegally adopted through fraudulent schemes, though dozens more cases remain open as authorities work to untangle adoption records that span 2 decades. But the victory feels complicated when I think about the families who genuinely believed they were providing homes for orphaned children and who had to surrender children they had grown to love. The ethical questions about international adoption, fraud, and the children's best interests don't have simple answers, even when the legal outcomes seem clear. The children and I have been seeing a family therapist who specializes in trauma recovery, and those sessions have taught me that healing doesn't follow a straight line or a predictable timeline. Emma has nightmares sometimes, usually about being taken away again, and James occasionally becomes anxious when I leave for routine errands. But they've also developed a resilience that impresses everyone who works with them. Last month, Emma asked if she could write a letter to her mother. I thought she meant Sarah, but she clarified that she wanted to write to Ingrid, the woman who had cared for her in Switzerland. I want to tell her that I'm okay, and that I still remember how she sang to me when I was scared, Emma explained. She was a good mommy too, even if she wasn't supposed to be mine. The letter Emma wrote was remarkable for its maturity and compassion. She thanked Ingrid for taking care of her during a difficult time, and assured her that she was happy living with me, but would never forget the kindness she had received. Ingrid's response included photographs of the garden she had planted in Emma's honor and a promise to always remember the little girl who had taught her about the different forms that love can take. James has started asking about his father more frequently, and I've created a memory book filled with photographs and stories about Michael's life. We read through it together every Sunday evening, and James has begun adding his own drawings and dictated memories to the collection. His favorite story is about how Michael used to make pancakes shaped like animals on Saturday mornings, and James has convinced me to continue this tradition even though my pancake animals look nothing like Michael's did. The financial settlement from the trafficking case provided enough money to establish medical trusts for both children and to ensure they'll have the resources they need for ongoing care throughout their lives. But more importantly, the experience has taught me that family isn't just about shared DNA or legal relationships. It's about the people who choose to love and protect each other through the worst circumstances life can create. 6 months ago, I received an unexpected visitor. Agent Martinez came to the house not on official business, but to tell me that she was retiring from the FBI and moving to our city to be closer to her own grandchildren. Francis, working on your case reminded me that there are more important things than career advancement, she said. Sometimes the people we meet during our most difficult moments become the people we can't imagine living without. She has become an honorary aunt to Emma and James, and her law enforcement experience has been invaluable in helping them understand that there are good people in authority positions who work to protect children rather than harm them. Her friendship has been a gift I never expected from the worst experience of my life. But the question that haunts me most often comes from my own reflections about Sarah's choices and motivations. I find myself wondering whether there was something I could have done differently, some sign I should have recognized, some way I could have helped her make better choices for her children. The rational part of my mind knows that Sarah was an adult who made deliberate decisions to betray everyone who loved her. But the grandmother in me grieves for the woman I thought I knew and for the family relationships that were destroyed by her deceptions. Last week, while cleaning out a closet, I found a card that Emma had made for Mother's Day 2 years before Michael's death. It was addressed to Sarah and decorated with crayon flowers and a poem about how much Emma loved her mommy. The innocence and trust in that card broke my heart because it reminded me that Sarah had been loved completely by children who deserved better from her. But I've also learned to recognize the difference between grief and guilt, and to understand that my responsibility is to help Emma and James heal from their experiences, rather than to carry blame for choices that were never mine to make. Michael trusted me to protect his children, And despite the complexity of our journey, they are safe and loved and building lives that honor his memory. This morning, Emma found me looking through Michael's old teaching materials and asked if I thought her daddy would be proud of how she's handling her medical treatments and school challenges. Emma, I told her, your daddy would be amazed by your strength and your kindness. He would love the way you take care of James and the way you remember to be grateful for the good people who have helped us. Do you think he knows that we're okay now? She asked. I looked at this remarkable little girl who has survived abandonment, displacement, and trauma while maintaining her capacity for love and hope. And I felt Michael's presence so strongly that I could almost hear his voice. Yes, sweetheart. I think he knows exactly how okay we are, and I think he's very proud of all of us. This evening, as I tucked James into bed, he asked me a question that has become part of our nightly routine. Grandma, Mommy, will you always keep me safe? Always, James. No matter what happens, you will always be safe with me. But as I turned off his bedroom light, I noticed something that made me pause. On his nightstand was a small envelope that hadn't been there that morning, addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a simple note that read, "Some stories never truly end. Be watchful. A friend." The note could be harmless, perhaps from one of our supporters who wanted to remain anonymous. But given our history, I can't ignore the possibility that someone connected to Sarah's network is still monitoring our lives. I've contacted Agent Martinez, and we've agreed to increase security precautions without alarming the children. Perhaps true safety is an illusion for families who have been touched by the kind of evil we encountered. But what I know with certainty is that love is stronger than fear, and that Emma and James have taught me that healing is possible even after the worst betrayals. Whatever challenges may still come, we'll face them together, armed with the knowledge that we've already survived more than we ever thought possible. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, leave your like, and share it with someone special who needs to hear what I lived through. This is a space of love and respect, and every day there's a different story of strong, courageous women who never gave up.